Our next speaker, I happen to notice, was on your white paper, so it's great to see an epidemiologist on that white important paper that you've put together. Eunjung Lee is a professor at University of Southern California. She did her earlier training in Korea and then at Seoul National University, I believe, and then went to USC for her PhD. And she'll be talking to us today about ethnic and racial differences in gastric cancer incidence in the US. Thank you very much.
So thank you, and it's great to be here. Just after the pandemic, it's my first trip. It's great to see so many of you interested in gastric cancer. It's sort of unusual. So I'm going to talk about ethnic racial differences in gastric cancer incidence in the US. Again, while we are waiting, I'm an epidemiologist. I work at USC. The other hat, my work is doing a research in breast cancer and chemicals, and I also wear a hat as an epidemiologist for Cancer Registry in LA County. So official name of Cancer Registry in LA County is LA County Cancer Surveillance Program. And I work with Dr. Daniel Stephen, who is not here. He was here 2 years ago. In the meantime, he retired, is enjoying his relaxed life. So that's something I didn't prepare to talk about, and that's, I think, pretty much it that I can say without the slides. Okay, so one more thing is gastric cancer is not in the top 10 cancer sites in the US. It is number 12 for men and number 16 in women, as Sheil just said. And then the next slide I was going to show was the significantly high rate in the US in the 1930s. So in the 1930s, gastric cancer was the leading cause of cancer death. And then it declined dramatically over time into the 1970s. And then it continued to decline after that. Then I was going to show you more recent incidence trends in the US. Thank you. Using the SEER data between 2000 and 2019. So for those of you who are not familiar to what SEER is, it's surveillance, epidemiology, and end results. SEER is an NCI program providing collective data from selected population-based cancer registries across the states. And SEER has been expanding over time, and now it has 22 registries. Sorry, it has 22 registries covering about half of the U.S. population. So go back. Thank you. So the rate has been decreasing across all racial ethnic groups in the US between 2000 and 2019. And what we can see here is a remarkable disparity across racial ethnic groups. So for all minority groups, the green is American Indian and Alaska Native, and then non-Hispanic Black and API, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Hispanic populations all have about twice higher incidence than non-Hispanic whites, both for men and women. About the API, it is now better recognized that API, or Asian subgroups, are a heterogeneous group, and disaggregating API or Asian subgroups could reveal some hidden health disparities. Next. And Asian American populations have grown substantially over time. And just between 2000 and 2019, the number has doubled. And with this increasing number, we are now better positioned to provide the subgroup-specific disaggregated data. Next. In fact, in LA County, where we have a large Asian population, we have been disaggregating API or Asian subgroups and reporting the subgroup-specific instance since 1976. So now we can see remarkable and enormous disparities for certain subgroups. So Korean Americans have the highest instance, and Japanese, shown in purple, have the second highest, together with the Vietnamese, shown in green. And the non-Latino whites at the bottom have the lowest rate, together with Filipinos and South Asians. And in the middle, there are a number of minority groups, including African American, Chinese, Hispanics, and Southeast Asians. Still, these groups also have nearly twofold higher instance than non-Hispanic whites. A similar pattern of instance disparity is observed for women. Next. I just want to point out that the recent rates in Koreans towards the right part of the graph is similar to the rates in US whites in the 1940s. And recent rates in the group there, including African American, Hispanic, and Chinese, the Southeast Asians, that's similar to the rates in whites in the 1970s. So next. Worldwide, in Korea and in Japan have been reporting the highest instance. So we wanted to look at the instance trends in Korean Americans and Japanese Americans, the two groups that have the highest rate in the US. This time using the data from California. It's a statewide data available since 1988. Next. So as in LA, Korean Americans have the highest instance, about 5 times that the non-Hispanic whites. Next. And about half when compared to the data from South Korea. Next. Now, adding the data on Japanese, the top, the South Korea and Japan have the highest instance worldwide. In the middle, in the black, that's Japanese American rate. They have the second highest instance in California, but there is a big gap between Korean and Japanese Americans in California. So Japanese Americans' rates are closer to the rate in non-Hispanic whites than to the rate in native Japanese. Next. So the similar instance pattern is observed for women. Now, can you go back? Can you go back one? Thank you. So the difference between Korean American and Japanese American instance trends can be attributed to the difference in their immigration history. So Japanese Americans have much longer immigration history. So 70% of them are US-born, second, third, or fourth generation immigrants. But the vast majority of Koreans, up to 70%, were born in Korea. And we know that Asian immigrants experience significant changes in lifestyle and cancer instance patterns after migration. Next. We wanted to look at the instance patterns by nativity or by country of birth. This is California data. And the blues are men and yellows are women. So here we can see that the instance in US-born Japanese Americans are very low. It's close to the rate in non-Hispanic whites. But the rates in foreign-born Japanese is much, much higher. It's almost the same as the rate in foreign-born Korean Americans. So especially for men. Next. So here we are adding the data for other immigrant populations. Some US-born populations, the data are hidden because the numbers are so small, so we have to suppress. And next. So a few notable findings are that for Chinese American men and women, their instance is, foreign-born Chinese American men and women, their instance is higher than the incidence in non-Hispanic men and women, respectively. Next. But for US-born Chinese Americans, the incidence is pretty low. Next. For Filipino Americans, the incidence was low regardless of nativity. Next. And for Hispanics, the difference between US-born and foreign-born populations was relatively small. And the incidence in US-born, next, Hispanic men and women were higher than the rates in non-Hispanic white men and women, respectively, again. Next. Sorry, go back. So the overall conclusion from this nativity-specific analysis is that generally, foreign-born immigrant populations are at much, much higher risk compared to their US-born counterparts. So we have some data coming from the real data that will supplement the amazing results from the modeling. So next. With that, we are now looking at the stage distribution. So this graph shows the percentage of a localized stage. So as Sherita mentioned, it's a registry term of earlier stage diagnosis. So what it shows is percentage of a localized stage disease out of all stomach cancer patients. And the time frame between 1988 and 2019. As we can see here, the red line, that's for Korean Americans. The percentage of localized disease is higher in Korean Americans than all other race ethnic groups, consistently throughout the time period. And for some of you who were here 2 years ago, you may recall that we said the gap between Korean Americans and all others were widening. And this time, the data from the most recent time frame, the percentage for Korean Americans actually declined. We are not sure if this is just one-time fluctuation or may persist in the future, but regardless, it is clear that Korean Americans are diagnosed earlier than any other race ethnic groups. Next. But the data from Japan and Korea are much higher. So Japan, about 56% around 2006, and in Korea, 67% in 2019. So next. So the data are separated by nativity. Next. Here we can see that foreign-born Korean Americans have the highest percentage of a localized stage diagnosis. In contrast, the percentage in foreign-born Japanese Americans was lowest. So this is puzzling finding. We don't have an explanation for that. Next. Next. So now we are looking at the percentage or stage distribution among Korean Americans across the states using the SEER data. As we can see here, the percentage of localized stage diagnosis among Korean Americans was higher in LA County than in other areas in California or outside of California. So 49, 41, and 36%. Next. But for other race ethnic groups, this was not true. So percentages were similar across the regions or even lower in LA County. Next. Again, all these percentages much lower than that in South Korea, 66%, where there is a population-based screening program. And also the opportunistic endoscopy screening is widely available as in Japan. Next. So what's different in LA County is that there is a large Korean American community. So that's the largest community outside of Korea. So many Korean patients in LA County have access to Korean American physicians. So they are likely to be more aware and more open to all the use of endoscopy. And there was community-driven efforts to increase awareness among physicians and patients early on. So next. So we believe a more aggressive use of endoscopy led to earlier diagnosis in Korean Americans. Again, this is lower than what's being done in Korea. And we believe it can be improved and it should be expanded to other racial ethnic groups, particularly the foreign-born Japanese Americans. Next. So expected from the stage distribution, the 5-year survival rate in California is highest among Korean Americans. That's 44%. Next. And looking at the same survival rate among Korean Americans across the Sierra region, we see that survival is higher in LA County than other areas of California or outside of California. Next. Again, this is much lower than the survival rate in native Koreans. Next. So this is my last slide, and it shows the time trends of death rate due to stomach cancer by race ethnicity in California. Even though Korean Americans are diagnosed earlier, they have the highest mortality rate because of the high incidence. And there's a 5-fold difference between Korean Americans and non-Hispanic whites. And for the other minority groups, it doesn't look that different in this graph, but their mortality rate is still more than twice than the mortality rate in non-Hispanic whites. Next. So in summary, stomach cancer is not common in the US, but there are high-risk race ethnic groups. And foreign-born immigrant populations experience substantial disparities. And Korean Americans are diagnosed earlier, likely due to earlier use of endoscopy. And as we'll learn later, lung cancer screening for asymptomatic high-risk populations with heavy smoking history could provide an example for targeted screening. So we hope that we could consider and offer insurance coverage for endoscopy screening for high-risk populations. Next. So my acknowledgements to my colleagues at USC and Cancer Registry in LA County. So again, Dennis was here 2 years ago. He has been the strong supporter of our gastric cancer work in LA County Cancer Surveillance Program. Thank you.